Hello, I'm Tristram Hooley and I'm giving a lecture for the Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences. In this lecture I'm talking about an introduction to career theory and focusing on the career theories that we describe as developmental career theories or developmentalism. One of the problems with a lot of traditional career theories is that they assume that people make a single career choice, that you either choose to go here or there, and that career choices are pretty much the same regardless of who you are or where you are. Developmentalism is really coming from a critique of that kind of position, and so it starts to challenge that in a number of ways. So first, it really argues that career emerges over time. It's not a single choice or decision that we make at one point. And it recognises that at different points in our lives, we might well have different kinds of career decisions that we might want to make. So it recognises that life course aspect of our careers. And this is obvious really, because if we look at children and their career aspirations, we can see that they are quite different from adults. And so somewhere along the line, they've clearly changed. The child has developed. So this is some pictures that are some nice research from education and employers, and this research talks about what are young people, primary school age children, what are their career aspirations. And it says, well actually, being a sportsman or a sportswoman is their sort of number one career aspiration, and these young people have drawn these in various ways. Now, at some point, they will probably change those aspirations. And what developmentalism is really trying to do is account for how that process of change and development happens. So Ginsberg et al. Talk about life stages, and they really focus on 3 life stages that happen really in childhood and adolescence. So they're saying, well, up to the age of about 11, a child is essentially in a fantasy career. They could be anything they want. They might be a sportsman, they might be a princess, they might be a dragon. They could be anything, but it's fantasy, it's not real, it's not connected to the reality. And then people move into a tentative stage where they're thinking about these things. They're thinking about their interests, about their capacity, about their value, and so on. And then by the time you get to 17, you're starting to become more realistic. Now, that doesn't mean you've chosen your career. You've still got lots of exploration and specification to do, figuring out what's exactly right for you. But by the time you get to 17, you're starting to do that in a meaningful way that is going to connect to what you ultimately do. Gottfredson has a similar theory, which she calls the theory of circumscription and compromise. And these are her 2 main concepts about how career choice is formed. So, similar to Erickson, she has a developmental model. So she says to start with young children, they focus on size and power. What's a powerful job as opposed to a weak job? And that's around the age of 3 to 5. She then says, well, look, by the time they get to 6 to 8, they can start to see, well, there are men's jobs and there are women's jobs. And they start to make the distinction between those different jobs. As they get to the age of 9, up to about the age of 13, they start to recognise that there is social class, there's different status and different amounts of money attached to different jobs, and that starts to influence them. They start to figure out, well, which one do I fit in with? And it's only at the age of about 14 they start to really think about themselves and what do they want, what are they good at, and so on. And so all of these processes are a process of gradual narrowing, circumscription of choices, and you end up with a smaller and smaller set of career choices to make. After that, you then compromise because you know that you can't necessarily get everything, so you develop some priorities. What is it I'm looking for from a job? And you try and find things that broadly meet those priorities. And then you try and do something to stop yourself ending up in jobs that don't meet those priorities, they're not good enough. And then ultimately you're trying to accommodate yourself to whatever you've chosen. So this process of compromise combines with the circumscription and leads people towards career choice. The problem with Erickson and Gottfredson's theories is that they leave us stranded at the age of maturation. So in different cultures. We might mature at different ages, but certainly by the end of our teenage years, they've got very little to say. And yet we know that career continues to develop, and we continue to develop alongside it. So that's why it's very useful that we've also got a theory from Donald Super here. And this is what Donald Super called the life career rainbow. And he said this is not just something that happens during your first perhaps 20 years, 25 years. Your process of change and development continues right throughout your life. It continues because you get older, you establish yourself in a career, you then maintain that career, and ultimately you retire and decline from that career. But you also, during that time, you're weaving together a range of different roles, whether you're a worker or a parent or a partner or a leisureite. So he starts to join together all of these different things. And it echoes back to what I said in the first lecture, that individuals are not, their career is not just their work, it's broader than that. It encompasses a range of life roles. So Super's life career rainbow really tries to capture that. Now, there have been a number of criticisms of developmental theories, which I'll briefly rehearse here. So developmental theories are highly normative. They say this is how things are, but they also say this is how things should be. And if you're not like this, then in some way you're not normal. And that's problematic because it ignores inevitably a lot of individual differences. So some people perhaps might retrain in their 30s or 40s and then spend less time establishing themselves in a career and maintaining that career before they retire. That seems to me perfectly legitimate. That's not an unusual thing to do. Equally, one child might hold on to fantasies about some fantastical career that they want to do for a bit longer than another. That may not be a problem. So we need to recognise that individual differences may not be a problem. But perhaps more important than that, we also need to recognise that these developmental theories often ignore national, cultural, class and economic differences. So just as a basic thing, in some cultures, the majority of people are leaving school at the age of 11, in others at the age of 14. And it's only in certain Western countries that we see increasing numbers of people going into post-secondary education and perhaps not leaving effectively school until they're in their early 20s. Now, clearly the developmental process for those different groups of people leaving school at different ages is going to be different. It's going to be more extended if you stay in education longer. So we need to recognise the differences that we see in different countries and cultures across the world. And this has led some people to say that these kinds of theories increasingly seem like good descriptions of how 20th century middle class white men develop their careers. And so that's obviously can be quite problematic. So I've got some references for you if you're interested in exploring this further, but in summary I'd say developmental theories recognise that individuals' development changes the context for their career decision making and management. So as you develop as an individual, your career decision making will also change and develop. They help us to recognise the dynamism of individuals, and they challenge the idea that we talked about in the previous lecture of a single fit. So people may well find something that works for them, but then later in their life they may need to find something else. They may choose a career as a young teenager and realise that that's wrong by the time they're ready to start work. That's fine. Developmentalism helps us to account for that. But developmental theories can be very normative, and they may not apply in the same way for all individuals, for all cultures, for all countries, and so on. And that's something we need to be careful when we try and use them. So thank you for listening. I hope that was useful, and I will see you at the next lecture.